Great stuff. Okay. So first and foremost, good morning, everyone. Thank you ever so much for joining us on what we certainly hope will be a really interesting and insightful session this morning. We have the wonderfully talented Mr. Brendan Williams, who is the founder of the Free Consultancy. And we're going to be taking a bit of a look into the really exciting and sort of fast-growing area of low and no. Cool. Okay, so for any of you that might not have been to one of our webinars before, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what to expect this morning. We hope it's not going to take more than about sort of 45 minutes, but we will give you a kind of a quick intro into who's on the call this morning. Obviously, you know, for those of you that have been before, know that this is in no way a sales pitch. We really like to keep these sessions short and punchy and try and give you as much sort of insight and inspiration to sort of take away and make these really practical sessions. But we do want to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do. Then we are going to take a brief look at some of the macro trends that are really driving this sort of exciting area of the industry. Now, I know that most of the people that are on board with the webinar this morning are drinks industry professionals, and you will probably know these trends inside out. But what we're going to do is lift the lid a little bit on some of the key areas that that we're focusing on and seeing how they're affecting and how they're playing out now and in the future for low and no. Then we have created some sort of cornerstones of engagement, or sort of territories, if you will, that Brendan is going to take you through and just, I suppose, give a few examples of some brands that are really leveraging these in the interesting and inspiring ways, and hopefully give you guys a bit of inspiration at the same time. Then we'll move on to how we can start to shape how these affect our strategies and how we can start to shape things going forward, as well as a few of the kind of like hidden pitfalls that you might want to avoid when you're sort of thinking about where you're going to take your low and no strategies going forward. And then we'll round up with a Q&A at the end. Now, we will be monitoring the sort of chat function, the Q&A function throughout, but if you think of any questions at all, then please do pop them in there and we will come back to them at the end. So just to start, Brendan, do you want to sort of say good morning to everyone and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I think there's a slide later on that has an intro, but good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here today. Jody, you might just want to go to the next slide, or the slide. Cool. I'll do the proper intro.
Perfect. And I'm Jody. I'm the head of business development over at Quantum. So just by way of a short introduction to Quantum, for any of you on the call or on the webinar that haven't worked with us before, we are a brand experience agency, and we focus very much on working with businesses and brands that need to think and act differently, and certainly it's never been more important to do so than in today's climate. And our focus has always been really to use creativity to drive change and turn strategy into physical action. We talk a lot about big ideas in many places, because as a team, we love to approach any brand challenge with a really open mindset. We're quite channel agnostic as an agency. So being that we have sort of multidiscipline, we will always think about what tactics and channels and approach is really appropriate to drive that sort of change in behavior. And in terms of what we always guarantee, we will use clarity. So we like to focus on turning complex into the elegantly simple, and using creativity to really drive that positive change. In terms of our key deliverables, if you will, we work in creating campaigns and toolkits that grow and develop both brands and category. We focus on building brands in the real world, so bringing both the physical and digital experiences together across the path to purchase. We do an awful lot of work with global platforms and developing them in a way that they can be executed really efficiently and effectively in local markets. Now, that might be taking a platform and working with local experts across the globe to uncover those sort of market nuances and work out how we can best adapt those global strategies to suit. And last but by no means least, our key areas of focus are shopper and consumer. So really designing those interactions with consumers and shoppers when they are most effective and when they're needed most. And of course, we will always promise absolutely top-notch creative, but not only creative that's engaging and provocative, but also drives change in the real world. And that's certainly how we kind of measure our success. And here is a kind of an overview of some of the brands that we work with. Now, we do work across various FMCG brands in different sectors, but being that this morning is largely focused on drinks, these are some of the brands that, that we work with on a day-to-day basis. Okay, Brendan, do you want to kind of introduce the free consultancy and tell the guys a little bit about what you do?
Yes, thanks, Jody. Hi, everyone. I'm Brendan. I'm from the Free Consultancy. I've started TFC to help businesses specifically in the low and no space. I've worked in the drinks industry for about 20 years. Many of those years have been focused on low and no. For the last 3 and a bit years, I was the global marketing director for Alcohol-Free at Carlsberg. I was based in Copenhagen. So I played a key role for in maybe 40 plus markets around the world with their local brand portfolios, with the global brands. And I've supported businesses through different stages of low and no growth. I've seen a lot of consistencies in how brands grow, and I've spent a lot of time codifying this into growth frameworks. So the key focus of TFC really is to help businesses through strategic planning, all the way through to implementation. So we do things like category and portfolio strategy, brand development, integrated planning, anything around operational excellence on marketing plans, and even down to trade execution, getting really into the nitty-gritty of where to place products on shelves, how to really drive conversion to purchase. So this business is really a natural progression of my work in drinks. I also think low and no is loads of fun. I personally believe that low and no is a segment that will transform taste expectations and modernize all drink segments as the alcohol industry starts to play more broadly. So I'm really pleased to be part of it. And I'm pleased to be here today and contribute to this discussion.
Great stuff. Cool. Okay, so let's sort of kick off. I suppose as an opening question, Brendan, obviously since 2018, low and no has seen an amazing and unbelievable surge in interest, largely from a consumer perspective, but you know, as a reflection of that with the industry as well. Why, you know, briefly, why is that, and what do you think's caused that shift? And I suppose fundamentally, where are we going next?
Look, I think there's been a massive gap in the drinks market for adult flavors for a long time. I think it's been hugely poorly serviced until now. You know, people are so used to compromising in this territory, and in any conference or any conversation I have, it's always the discussion about, oh, you'd have to default to water and soft drinks. But now there's a huge shift to buying low and no for positive reasons. Also, and I'll talk about that in a sec, but the alcohol industry is getting way more sophisticated as well. So, you know, there's margin pressure on the alcohol categories. There's declining volumes. They're looking to drive incremental margin by trading in volume and value from soft drinks and water. So that's driving low and no heavily. But I think from a consumer's perspective, there's two things going on. There's two distinct groups in my mind in this segment. One are the mindful drinkers or the alcohol avoiders. These people tend to be older. They're more of the core consumption at the moment, but they will be a much smaller proportion going forward. Interestingly, younger consumers are choosing drinks for flavor reasons, not necessarily alcohol. And I personally believe that alcohol-free will become much more like sugar-free or gluten-free. It's a healthier option that, because alcohol is less important in younger people's lives, will just be, oh, it's a healthier thing that fits this occasion in the day. And if you look at the penetration curves for low and no, you can see them skewing heavily to younger drinkers. So I would say the segment's really in recruitment stage. It's not retention. It's really getting the younger consumers into it. And I would say the other thing, just from a cultural perspective, social lives have across the board of demographics have so many more facets these days. I mean, not taking into account lockdown, of course. But alcohol is often confined to end of night, especially with younger consumers, and it's less important throughout the day. And with taste improving and low and no, it's just not a compromise anymore. And that's what's causing this seismic shift towards low and no.
Great stuff. So just moving on to kind of a key thing that I know we've spoken about before, Brendan, talk about sort of a move from like this negative compromise to a positive choice. Do you want to sort of tell us a little bit more about that and explain what that?
Yeah, I think I sort of mentioned that in the last one. I think that for years people have been compromising with very few choices. I think a good litmus test of this is if you go out to a restaurant or go out to a pub and you ask for a low or no alcohol option. Generally, there aren't any, or generally it's water or soft drinks. And these aren't great adult flavors. And that is a forced choice. It's a negative compromise. You may be drinking or pregnant or avoiding alcohol for health reasons, but it's still a compromise. And that's made up the lion's share of the segment for so long. And what we're seeing now is actually the attitude, particularly of younger drinkers, is that they are searching for great flavor. They're looking for brands that promise a great taste experience, and they're looking for brands that fit into occasions during the day where alcohol is just less relevant. And as availability grows, consumers look to satisfy their needs in more complex ways across more and more occasions. And so that's why the reason for choosing low and no is becoming much more positive. So I kind of think that the positive choosers will be, the vast majority of this segment as it grows from 3% in the UK up towards 10% or 15% wherever it settles.
Great stuff. Cool. Okay, so just moving on. As I mentioned earlier, I'm sure most of the people on the call today will be aware of those kind of macro trends that are driving things forward at a global level. But can you give us your take on how these are evolving specifically into the world of low and no? So if we start with the kind of obvious trends of health and wellness. Now, low and no has got loads of links in this space, but would you mind sort of sharing any thoughts and advice on how you see this sort of playing out, and anything people should sort of watch out for?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's a secret that this is the number one macro trend that's going on around the world. Firstly, I would say it's really positive that the alcohol industry is meeting these needs. The broadening of the portfolio into alcohol-free options is just a really positive thing from so many different angles. In terms of this as a trend, I would say don't take the insights at face value. As I'm talking to the marketers in the room, this doesn't mean people are looking for sports drinks. And I say that as someone, if you were listening to me on Tuesday at the Low No conference, I admitted to having launched vitamin-enhanced alcohol-free and isotonic beers, which have a role, but they have a role in very advanced markets. And I think, when people talk about health and wellness, actually they're talking about more day-to-day things as well. And what's come out of lots of research that I've done is that people associate pretty mundane things to living a healthy, well life. And, in terms of being active, people even think, getting off the bus one stop early or walking in, or just the act of commuting on a bike, etc. That's kind of their whole regime. So in some ways, I think, overestimating what people mean is one pitfall. But also just recognizing that low and no as a segment has core attributes, which by themselves are just healthier. There's no alcohol, generally natural, very low in calories. It fits, most of the brands fit neatly into modern life. And often consumers are not looking for more wellness than that. And we know that health has become a full-time lifestyle. We are literally inundated with choices in food, drink, and social time. The popularity of life hacks on Instagram is an example of that. And actually our sense of what is well-being is also broadening to include things like mental health. Who knew about anxiety or hangover anxiety until recent years? I don't think it was even on the radar. But things like that are driving this trend. And we'll talk a little bit more about, well, if it's not health and wellness broadly, what is it specifically? And I will talk to that a little bit more. But I just think there's more behind it. And I think the implications for brands are about leveraging healthier credentials. I think low and no brands need to be a bit more interesting. If you look to the broader category, you can see really interesting stories of provenance on ingredients and brand, the use of heritage or craftsmanship, or really well told stories of taste. And I think that's where no and low needs to go.
Cool, thank you. Okay, so technology clearly plays a fundamental role in the way that everything's changing, in the way that the world is sort of moving forward. And we see this in all sorts of markets, but how do you see this specifically affecting the world of low and no?
Yeah, well, it drives all categories, doesn't it? I mean, it's such a universal impact. But specifically for low no, I spent a lot of time just shorthanding these insights by saying no one wants to be drunk on Instagram. But actually, to answer it more seriously, I think digital has become a powerful social force for younger consumers. It is a force for education, political awareness, cultural development. It's not just a social tool. And I think that in relation to no and low, it just the connectedness and the speed in which information goes around. We've seen it's the rapid erasing of the stigma of alcohol-free, and I would say that's literally the last few years. I mean, it was highly questioned. I mean, there was a lot of beer shaming going on not so long ago when people chose an alcohol-free option. And I just think the amount of information at people's hands and people seeing, positive role models in healthy lifestyles is literally changing this. I think implications for marketers here is we can have a lot of fun using digital assets to engage consumers. There are so many fun things that you can do across all the different platforms to drive awareness, to really build positive examples of education, and helping to not just do the positioning for your brands, but reposition the segment as something that is positive, aspirational for everyone. And also, if I ever work with marketers on giving feedback on their digital plans, I am always recommending people be very clear about what their digital ecosystem is. How does each asset and each touch point link into the brand funnel? So how are you building awareness, consideration, trial? All digital ecosystems should be pointing towards either digital trial through e-commerce or physical points of trial where you've done sampling, or there's availability, or it's it's a retail channel in itself. So like so many other categories, it's so vitally important, but there are a number of different aspects for why it is so important.
Cool. Okay, great, thank you. And just sort of moving on, for some of the people on the call may recall, but we've come a long way as a sector from the days of Caliber, which was for those of you that aren't familiar, was a kind of probably one of the only alcohol-free beers that was available for quite some time, and clearly we've made sort of stratospheric leaps in terms of quality and taste. What do you think was the change that triggered that, and what do you expect to see sort of going forward?
Well, I think that there is a growing awareness that low and no is tasting better. I think that it's much more valuable for the industry now because there is a need to trade in more incremental value. As I mentioned before, I mean, there's volume and margin pressure in the broader alcohol categories, and that is a big incentive for businesses to make this shift. But I think consumers now know that they don't have to compromise so much. Some of it's a supply-driven trend, availability in different channels and different occasions. People are experiencing the fact that low and no is tasting better. And what's driving this changes. I mean, brewing and flavor technology is improving. You know, there are new yeasts coming along all the time. I would say it's probably a couple of years before we see a 0-0 yeast, where you don't have to do a concentrate model and lose some of the taste on concentrates. I'm talking about beer there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a lot more focus on combining brew bases to use stopped fermentation and concentrate models and wheat to increase extract levels. And then more broadly across spirits and beer, there's newer flavor additives, you know, coming from Dula and Firmenich that are so much better than before. And when people know that they have to compromise less, they will choose more. And there are so many new incredible tastes that people will have fun exploring. I think segment growth goes from the basic question of will I buy no and low to what will I buy, to which occasion will I buy it for. And people really, you know, my experience of seeing these markets at different stages, people start enjoying exploring low and no and building their and expanding their repertoire over time. And that just drives growth. So I am personally very obsessive about taste. I know Greg Tuck is on this call, who is a organoleptic wizard, and we've shared you know, a lot of interesting taste observations. But I do think this is central to the growth of low and no, not just from the fact that we need to bridge this barrier or perception of bad taste, but we also need to make our brand propositions liquid out. Taste needs to play such a fundamental role in what we're telling consumers. And so, you know, long may this trend go. And, you know, I would expect that this would be very much like the craft segment, and how taste became absolutely paramount over time. And I think, you know, brands will be duking it out for the best tasting low no not long from now.
Great stuff. Cool. Okay, so we mentioned before about sort of developing out some individual, I suppose, territories, or what we're terming as cornerstones of engagement, and these are kind of primary drivers that we're really sort of seeing across the board. Do you want to give us a quick sort of overview of your thoughts on this before we really dive into the detail of these and show some examples?
Yes, yeah. Another one of my things, it's important to recognize that low and no isn't one homogenous segment driven only by the need to avoid alcohol. If that were the case, we wouldn't see the massive portfolio expansion and the massive growth we're seeing in markets around the world. You know, I think having low and no alcohol as your primary brand proposition will only get you so far. I'll talk about market stages a little bit later, but you know, the first stage is when penetration's under 5%. This is really the create stage, and it's absolutely relevant that you'll be talking about the absence of alcohol so that people know what they're buying, and that the availability is there. Taste is really going to build your trial and penetration, but great brand positioning and activation will build your brand. So, you know, some of this thinking that we'll share may also deepen thinking for line extensions that have larger parent brands. Quite often in that scenario, I don't see the full brand ladder being expressed through the alcohol-free brand. So I really see this as the next stage of, you know, brand marketing and commercial thinking, is when we start to think more specifically and be more targeted about what we're doing with our brands. Because as I mentioned, as the segment grows, simple needs grow to be much more complex very quickly, and consumers and shoppers will tailor their choices to their needs way more specifically and expand their repertoire. And that's good news for everyone, because that is rapid value growth for the category. So look, I think there's four here. These are based on my view of category segmentation that I've worked with across many businesses. It's based in beer, but I think it's relevant across other, you know, spirits and wine more broadly. I'll shine a light on each and just to briefly explain. And we have examples as well. And, you know, this is all to help marketers succeed in low and no by being more focused and differentiated and more appealing to consumers.
Great. Okay, so diving into the first kind of area and kicking off with bonding and socializing. As you mentioned, this is one of the kind of key moments for beer in general. How do we see this occasion developing as part of the low and no offer?
Well, it is the biggest segment in beer because it caters to the most simple needs. And if you did a need state segmentation on this by functional and emotional needs, you would see people need something refreshing. So it needs to be cold and wet, and they need to socialize. So being with friends is super, super important. In low and no, this is where most of the action has been. Absolutely from the global brands of Heineken and Carlsberg and ABI. There's possibly less innovation in terms of numbers of new products coming through in future, because I think in the UK, the portfolio will develop slightly differently. But really, this is the core 0-0 territory. So this is all about with friends at the pub, where there's a real need for belonging. It's where you create identity. It's where you bond with your friends. And the role for no low in the same way it is with regular beer is about getting a suitable drink that everyone accepts, that enhances the occasions, not a sweet compromise like soft drinks, and but something adult that adds to the occasion. And a little bit of sensory science on this one. I learned something a few years ago, which was very interesting, that actually on beer, when you increase the bitterness level up to a point, it actually increases the sip rate that people drink at, and the speed of their conversation. So bitterness is not alcohol. It doesn't change people's state of mind, but it is a mental cue that you are drinking an adult beverage. You are in an adult situation, and so the role of no low, even if you're not drinking alcohol, still transforms that occasion into something about bonding and socializing. So it really plays a key role that water and soft drink just can't. And this is such a big segment of the category that it's extending into daytime occasions. Lunch with friends, work lunches. Low no is absolutely high priority because it also trades in volume from tap water and CSD, which in places like on trade are lower margin. So this can be a really big value proposition to our retail partners. It's a mainstream marketing space. Generally, the brands you'll be familiar with, most of them, strong sponsorship links, leveraging big parent brands, and it is a really efficient way for those big brands to move into the space. And the one example I've got is, I think you've got on the next slide, is Budweiser Zero. If you're at the Low No conference, you will have seen a really good presentation of this. I was really impressed for its thoroughness. It's a big global brand. People who love craft beer may say boo to Budweiser, but I think they do so well in this space. It's a big global brand. It's got a heritage in sports and sponsorship. It's got presence in stadia. It's going to be there in Qatar. It'll be as a beer in those stadia. It does have a great taste. It's got a marketing campaign, just what we'd expect from that type of brand. And looking at their plan, they've just really nailed an integrated marketing communication plan. They've got a smart use of leading sports ambassadors and influencers. And so this is the beer to drink with your friends while you're watching sport. It doesn't try to be craft. It tries to be bang on in this space, and it's proudly Budweiser. And it's a really acceptable choice for when you're with your friends. So this is a great, 10 out of 10 example of how to play in this space.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting as well that the bonding and socializing, it just sort of creates new occasions as well that weren't formerly there because it was either the wrong moment for alcohol. And I think we've banded around the saying sort of beer is bigger than alcohol, and it's sort of like just creating those additional occasions that will enhance the sociability and bonding. And I think particularly when we kind of come out of where we are at the moment, that's going to be even more kind of important to have those additional new occasions.
Yeah, well, but actually they're not new occasions, Jody. They're old occasions. Having a beer at a work lunch during the weekday used to be the thing we did. Right. And then because of all changes around alcohol and so forth, that's a lost occasion. And no and low allows, you know, beer or spirits to move back into that occasion. And there's huge demand. Think about a weekday work lunch. That's actually one of the biggest occasions within the bonding and socializing space that that you could activate. And it's a great time to drive trial, because you're with friends, people are open to trial, and actually drives loads of incremental value for the retail partners or the on-trade guys as well. And, you know, I've done a lot of testing on trade draft, and people don't, you know, they'll have one tap water, which no one's earning any money out of. But if you offer them a draft beer, they'll have two. Yeah, and so it's a huge step up in value.
Sure, definitely. So just kind of building on, we mentioned the kind of health and wellness trend, which obviously directly links into this idea of life lived in balance. But as it's a key driver, what can we do to sort of really enhance this moment and this occasion for consumers?
Well, this is an example of, you know, how before I was saying you need to scratch the surface on health and well-being. This is currently more of a soft drinks territory, but it's definitely an area where low and no can go into. I think there are some sweet spots in, I mean, because these areas in health and wellness, there's sub areas as well. One sweet spot I think is active lifestyle, and that's on the spectrum of physical and emotional needs. And there's four that I would pick out just to give everyone a sense of how specific you can be playing in these spaces. I think if you look at something like physical replenishment, I would call this territory sort of refuel and replenish. And that's all about replenishment for body and mind. And, you know, there is a desire to have something that makes me ready for the what's next in my day. And that day may just be a transition moment between working and lunch, or in office, out of office. You know, vitamin water is something that plays really well in this area, but there's no reason low and no can't, because of the natural credentials, the healthier credentials, and it's all about rejuvenation and naturalness.
Sure.
The other area is feel-good rewards. You know, I think there are very few options for adults to have complex taste. San Pellegrino play very well into this place, but arguably low and no has greater permission and brings so many other taste cues to it, so could perform very well. The thing I like about San Pellegrino, they're totally focused on adult taste profiles. You know, they name their ingredients, lots of sense of provenance, and it is a real treat for adults. Then there's the do more physically place. I see a lot more innovation here in terms of botanicals, things like turmeric, low GI sweeteners that give you extended energy hits without the peaks and the drops. And then the last one would be emotional pick-me-up. And those would, excuse me, those would be drinks that reset the mood, have some energy. Nootropics are coming into this segment. CBD is already here on a lot of drinks, but this is a high value, because keep in mind, these can be premium and super premium, a really high value area. Yeah. If you link those to any green credentials, sustainability, vegan, gluten-free, all the better. A great example of this, actually, just as a positioning territory without all the fancy botanicals, is Nirvana. Mm-hmm. Excuse me, frog in my throat. I love the way they're tapping into this trend, albeit subtly. But, you know, their communication is about being 100% natural, from a family of beer lovers. There's no compromise to state of mind, you know, because of the lack of alcohol or just no alcohol. And it's all about, you know, doing things your way. And it's a lovely brand name that conjures up lots of different nice emotions. But the brand and the liquid is still all about the flavor and the beers, and they've even gone into kombucha. And so directionally, this feels like a fun part of a more balanced, healthy life. And I just like what they've done. And it's a good example here because, you know, not everything in the space needs to be justified by incredible botanicals or whatever. Actually, you can get there through some nice, gentle positioning work.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so moving on to free to have fun. There's a lot of sort of discussion about freedom and things like that. How can brands incorporate that into their platform?
Is it my PC, or have you? Oh, there you go. Right. Free to have fun. I think this is the up-tempo party segment. Very social, very up-tempo. This is counterintuitive for many of us because most associate alcohol with this occasion, but younger consumers are by far the early adopters in this space. It is driven by changing attitudes towards alcohol, and it's just not relevant during, pre-party sometimes where there's lots of pictures being taken. It's more about emotional uplift or as something that will be a catalyst for an up-tempo party. Ingredients can play a huge role here. If you look at some key occasions where this becomes really obviously important, things like daytime partying, festivals, summer festivals, who knows what's going to happen after lockdown. I presume there's going to be more of these outdoor events. It can even be high energy nights out, where alcohol is sometimes kind of seen as the end of the night, not the beginning or middle of it. But it's such a super vibrant space. I would expect you'd see more sensory functionality coming in here. The tingly, cold, hot, along with some really cut-through flavors. I'd say alcohol-free spirits can do this really well. Radlers, I personally believe there's going to be a renaissance of radlers across Europe. Central Europe, they really have it quite advanced, and I think sours as well. Because you've just put up the sours thing. Let's talk about that. If people haven't tried the sours yet, there's lots of them coming out within the craft space. So this is not necessarily the brand positioning territory, but I think this liquid is being consumed in these more fun, up-tempo times. The fruity lacto process sour beers, not necessarily the lambics, but the ones you can things like London Fields. Amazing passion fruit, just really, really amazing taste. And I think they're bringing this taste complexity, this fruitiness, this zesty sours. It's new and it's popular with a younger and more diverse range of drinkers. And talk about having more people in this segment. It's liquids like this that are really going to do it. So I would expect more innovation in this territory, more fruitiness, more fun with what fruitiness can be. Again, more sensory coming into it as well. Just any little attribute that will signal that there's an adult occasion coming along. And while I'm at it, I'm a huge fan of everything that's being done on Coleno. Wonderful. Great to see the joy around that brand, and I think that taps into this more up-tempo occasion. And big, also Big Drop doing great work. And then the picture you've got there, Jody, is the Mikkeller Riesling. I think I'd encourage everyone to try that actually, because it is a sensational taste. It's so refreshing. That brings out all the nice things of late hopping. So the aroma hopping, but the fruity aromas coming off it are combined with the nice fruity estery depth of that beer. Really, this brand is not positioned in this up-tempo fun, but really this would be drunk in those moments. You can tell I'm a bit excited about this territory.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like it's really kind of new take on where things can go.
Well, I just think it's an area that I'm talking about it. I mean, there's not just beer on the page, but I think this is a territory where soft drinks have been for a long time, but without any really appealing options there. And so as these more adult brands go out, we can do things as an industry that just are different and cut through and will be really popular.
Great stuff. Okay, so the last sort of territory, obviously authenticity and knowledge and discernment, things like that, are really key for all areas of the industry across the beers, wines and spirits categories. How do we see that sort of coming to play in the areas of low and no?
Yeah, so I've spent a lot of time working in this broad engagement territory with a number of brands. It is absolutely the part of what's been driving craft beer. You know, if you're in a social environment, typically these are more individual choices because not everyone likes the strong tastes. And you know, everyone knows that people who love the idea of independence and handmade craftsmanship and authenticity. It's really a powerful force in all categories. Beer is the most obvious one that you think of, but I think it's really important to low and know, and I do think it's going to be at the forefront of new innovation as the segment expands in the UK. And why is it important? Well, I think on a functional level, it's richer and more complex. And I think that just masks the absence of alcohol. And in fact, I think it mimics the effect of alcohol at the back of your throat when you swallow. And so functionally, it plays a real role. I mean, some of these brands, you can't tell that there's no alcohol in them unless you read the packaging. And also, you know, maybe this is a bit controversial, but I think some craft beers taste better with less alcohol as well. So it's sort of another reason. And look, I think there's lots of cool brands in the space. You've seen some Michelob, Big Drop, Camden, Brooklyn, all doing great work. And people will broaden their repertoires and they will seek more premiumness. One of the challenges in the UK market is that for low-no beer, the average price index is about 85, so it's trading at a discount to regular beer. So this segment, primarily craft beers, will be the force that drives that average price level up, that convinces retailers to allocate more shelf space, and that will drive growth for everyone.
Yeah, it's that idea of kind of having really rich and engaging stories, isn't it? Of kind of justifying a price premium almost to talk that through.
Yeah, and look, I think this is important for the craft brewers as well because it, you know, builds such incremental value for them, and they're able to create, excuse me, better tastes, and they have interesting stories to tell. And in this space, having a story to tell is so important because people don't want to just know there's a liquid that doesn't have alcohol. They want to know how it's made, by who, with what ingredients, you know what special things have been done. And the more that we can build that romance around these the process and the well-told tales of taste, the more engaged people will be, and it will transform low and no to being beer without the fun, or drinks without the fun, to being really interesting products in their own right. And some of these are really hard. I mean, Brooklyn is hard to make. So let me talk about that for a little bit. And look, shout out to my old employer, Carlsberg. They manage Brooklyn over here. It's an amazing example of launching into this space. It's all things Brooklyn. It does everything right that the brand does, and special effects. Their no alcohol variant is just such a hugely valuable part of that brand. What do I like about it? I think the marketing activation has been of the positioning territory. The UK launch was a beer and bagels at breakfast in Shoreditch, and just being a bit quirky, being in the wrong occasion at breakfast, and sampling then caught a lot of attention. But actually, no reason why you can't have it at different day parts, and I think that's great. They're also the first mover on, or one of the first movers on low-no draft. And I think that's so fundamental to changing people's experience, perception of this segment. And it drives, as I said before, drives so much value for the on-trade in new occasions where they're losing value anyway. And then the other thing about Brooklyn, it tastes amazing. It is a well-made beer, and I know the people who made it really sweated blood over the dry hopping and so forth. And hats off to them. It's probably one of the best in the world. But thinking outside of the world of beer, I would say spirit brands like Seedlip and Lyres are also good examples in this space. And I think this is a really rich area that has potential to grow the total segment because it shows the depth of what everyone is doing in much more detail. So very, very exciting space.
Yeah, I think also, I mean, just going on to that value perception piece as well, when you sort of talk about, general consumer response to pricing, and there is that kind of underlying thing of people thinking that because it hasn't got alcohol in it, it should be costing less. You know, that this is an area that you can really leverage to sort of enhance that experience and get people to get deeper flavor experiences and understand how the liquid has been made. You know, in many cases, it's, as you say there, as Brooklyn as an example, it's harder to make it taste as good as it does without alcohol, because alcohol does, have a positive effect on a lot of flavors. So I think that's really an interesting point. I'm conscious of
okay. Sorry.
time and things like that. So just rattling on to the next section. So for anyone who's looking to sort of enhance their current low and no strategy, Brendan, where would you focus, and what should you really watch out for? I know we've covered some of this already in the narrative, but yeah, what are your sort of key things?
Yeah. So the first piece of advice I would say is have a vision for the low and no segment and your brands within it. It's not always going to be small. We need to be planning for it to be big, and you need to chart the course for your brands and your business, and understand your role in terms of how you'll make it big, and be talking to your customers with great category to customer selling stories, and really get out there and start talking about the segment and merchandising it together, things like that. I think the other thing I would say is focus. I'll talk a lot about focus in the next 2 minutes, but there are different life stages. You need to be aware of those. And again, this is talking more from a beer perspective, because it's more developed, and I've seen that over so many different countries. But there's 3 key segments that I see. I call it create, accelerate, and expand. I think when it's under 5% household penetration, which means the vast majority are not buying it, our combined efforts need to be focused on driving trial. At this stage, there are very different strategies for the segment leaders and challenges, which I'll talk a little bit about, but trial is always the most important thing at this point. And you need to be aware of when and where it's the right time to be driving penetration, consumption frequency, premiumizing, driving basket size, all of those things. Then I think segments go through this accelerate stage, where it's getting more deep penetration in that high potential audience. And then after 10%, generally things go into a broadening or an expansion across different demographics, and the steps up investment in consumption frequency. And look, there are different sweet spots for marketing commercial strategies all the way along that growth, and that's not just a linear spectrum. You need to be aware that the challenges vary from time to time, but there are some obvious truths here in terms of when the segment is small, it's most cost effective to drive for market share, but you also need to be talking about the segment with customers at the same time. And just moving on quickly, I'd say through each of those stages, we have to consciously build our portfolios around the areas of engagement, which we just talked about. There are more of those, by the way, and there's obviously a lot more detail to them. And building your brand positioning richly, and also having the right portfolio. Avoid huge inefficient tails of SKUs, avoid low rate of sale niche variants. Really focus on your winners, and be really choiceful about at which stage you expand your portfolio, because also you need to support these in your key channels and with your key customers. And so going broad and deep with your portfolio too soon is a real challenge. And I think they'll just make your brand understandable. We talk about brand architecture. I talk about brand architecture a lot with marketers. And that's just, if you are offering vastly different liquids, or if it's relevant to a slightly broader consumer group, consider whether it's a variant or a sub-brand or a standalone brand, and get that architecture super, super tight so that people know what they're looking at. And then focus is the big one, and that's focus on where and how to win. Focus your marketing and distribution efforts, spreading yourself thin over a national launch, spreading your investment that thinly is not often the easiest way to success, especially given trial is so inconsistent across different regions. Really focus in any country, that is. Generally in your cities, it will be well ahead of your more suburban and rural areas. So really, I'd work out who are your key consumers, where do they live, which channels do they shop in, who are the key customers that you need to build relationships with. And then I would just say focus your marketing efforts on changing their behavior. Those consumers and those shoppers. Build plans that are really clear on, what you want to change. Like, who do you want to do what and by how? And, so many markets I've been in, and I sort of have operated as more or less an internal consultant for the last few years. But one of the biggest pitfalls I've seen, and this occurs all around the world, really is lack of being specific, lack of focus. And I'll give you an example. I mean, there is a big difference from saying, I will drive awareness of brand X to saying, I will get 18 to 24-year-old healthy hedonists living in urban areas of London during alfresco outdoor lunch occasions to choose brand X instead of water by merchandising tabletops, menu cards, and building staff recommendation. One is specific. One tells you exactly what you're going to do. One is just broad and in some ways not so measurable about whether really it's driving the brand. So focus your marketing efforts and really take some time to express them well at the planning stage. And then really quick, I'd get your commercial plan done first before you do the communication piece. The beer category and drinks category suffer from pretty low conversion to the aisle to selection as well. We don't always merchandise low and no in blocks in each beer, in each category, which makes it highly visible and easy to shop. Actually, they're quite often in the health food section or next to the home brand water, and many of us wonder why we're not selling. Finding low and no is one of the biggest barriers, a second biggest barrier in most markets. So the easier you can make it to find, the more it will grow the segment. And when the likes of Heineken have done their Zone Zero and there's full segment merchandising and increased shelf space, growth rates go from 10 or 20% every year. And in the case of Poland in 2018 and 19, went from about 20% up to 80. A second year, 80, because it was just a different thing to shop.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Great advice in there. Thank you. Cool. So just the last kind of point. What's the main thing that you see sort of businesses either doing wrong, or what you see as kind of like really holding them back?
Holding them. I think it's just been a small segment for a long time. It seemed like there's no demand. I think from an industry perspective, there's been an attitude that low no is the drinks without fun, and the cultural stigma of it being for problem drinkers has probably been present in commercial decisions as well. The big trends we talked about earlier are relatively new, certainly technology and not super new, but they're new versus the last few decades. And there's been, I think big brands have been slow to invest in people and in bigger teams, and often brand managers have multiple tasks, and the alcohol-free variant is their least favorite responsibility. But now there's momentum here, and I just think it's now valuable and important, and it has focus.
Yeah, wonderful, great. Okay, well, I'm just looking at the sort of Q&A, and there's a couple of questions that have come in, so we're just going to go through those. Firstly, it's a really good question, actually. What stage do you think the UK is in terms of its life stage in comparison to some of the other markets, and what could we potentially learn from them?
Yeah, it's really interesting in the UK, actually. I think that I'll talk about the beer category. Low no is only 3% of the total beer category. That might have changed since I last looked at it. So technically it's in what I would call the create stage. I mean, it's still establishing itself. The quirk in the UK is that household penetration, from my last reading on it, was about 6%. So I would say portfolio expansion needs to proceed with caution. Don't go out too big until you know that demand is there. Because even if it gets to 10%, it still means 90% of people aren't buying. But the quirk here is that the consumer trends are so well developed and so ahead of the segment size that it's really overdue for substantial growth. And I'm expecting that to start happening this year. I mean, I mentioned before, pricing is one of the functional barriers that are holding retailers back from increasing shelf space. But I do expect with more premium options like craft that this will change, because it will just be more profitable for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose just looking at the, dipping back to the alcohol-free beer category, how do you see that evolving moving forward? Do you think it's going to mimic the beer category itself, or do you think it's going to go its own sort of tangent?
Yeah, I need to be careful not to give too much away. Look, I think broadly what I see in lots of different markets is that low and no broadly replicates the wider drinks category, and for good reasons, because the drinks category is set up based on what people want to drink. But I would say UK will be different from other European countries because ale is so developed here, craft is so developed. We already have standalone craft brewers like Big Drop, and there's lots of great flavor characteristics coming out now. So I would expect that we would see much more craft and premium craft coming out, and that will push that average price index right up. I would expect there'll be better tasting 0.0s coming onto the market in the next 1 or 2 years. And I think there will be more specialty, the super premium end of things. So more phenolic tastes, more bottle conditioning, more higher extract brewing, those sort of things. And did I mention shandies? I think I might have mentioned it before earlier on, but I think there's going to be this big renaissance of radlers or shandies or panaches, whichever you want to call them. I think because they play much more directly into the soft drink space. If I look to Central European markets, generally they're about 50% of the total low-no volumes. And I think they're a great base to put botanicals onto. And that would be the other space, would be new innovative brews using botanicals with functionality is a subset of that renaissance of radler space. So, I think we will see a lot more of that. And if, look, I obviously know more about the beer segment at the moment, but from the spirits world, I think packaging innovation is going to lead the way. Ready to drink, lower price options, so that's a lower risk purchase. Minis to give people a trial. There'll be a lot more sampling. There'll be a lot more fitting to occasions and explaining to people when to drink. And wine, I would expect there'll be some focus on creating some great first, new entrants with amazing taste profiles.
That's great. I don't know if you can see the Q&A, but we just had another couple of questions come in, and that is specifically around that. We've obviously talked a fair amount about beers in this, but in terms of innovation for no and low spirits, what do you see as in terms of sort of opportunities for the future there?
Yeah, I mean, my credentials are more in beer, but look, I think we'll see much more use of botanicals. I think it's such a rich territory. I would say that it's going to go more against the life lived in balance segment of health and wellness. Mid-strength spirits, I think, are a key area there. But I wonder. I think we'll see more of what we've seen. So I think there'll be a split between things like Lyres, where they're broadly replicating what you can get in regular spirits, and then to the other new drinks like Kaleno, where and Seedlip, where they're bringing in more botanicals and more flavors. I would just expect that to be increasing, but it's that pack size. I mean, I think the biggest barrier is just the fact that forking out 20 quid to try something is a real barrier for a lot of people. So more shelf space in spirits, absolutely. And I do see longer term that things like I'll just use Seedlip as the example. Those Seedlip cans, full of botanicals, actually from a flavor profile cross right over into sort of botanicals with beer. And actually spirits can actually trade across a lot of volume from the beer category with those sort of RTD products. So I would expect there'd be much more focus on that area.
Great. Okay, and then just lastly, another question about CBD, and where would you categorize CBD, and how big do you think it can get for the UK?
I haven't seen the numbers from the States, although I'm following the world of cannabis in a lot of detail. My concerns at the moment about CBD is it's put in the pre-packed chilled soft drink section, not necessarily on shelf from what I can see, sometimes in the health area, not necessarily in this soft drink aisle. So it's suffering from a little bit of invisibility and identity confusion. I think it's going to play into this life lived in balance territory. I think we'll see a lot more of it. I think we'll see a stronger claims-based propositions coming out as we learn more and more. I mean, one of the drawbacks of CBD and THC is just a lack of research there. And I think initially when it was all launched in the States, there were so many claims being made that they lacked credibility. But I think within Europe will learn a lot from what's going on in the States and Canada, and be much more purposeful about it. And in the cannabis conference, they talk about the evolution of those CBD propositions. This idea of mental health and inner well-being, I think CBD can play really well into that space. But I think the one thing that people need to address is proof of efficacy, for want of a better word. If you say this is for releasing stress or calming or something like that, unless people actually feel that eventually, then those brands will quickly lose their credibility.
Great. Obviously, this is a really rich area. We're getting quite a couple more really good questions come through. So if you guys are okay, we'll just hang on to answer those. But do we think we'll move into other plant-based opportunities, replacing sort of, obviously beer is a cereal-based drink, and is there opportunity to look at more sort of plant-based products?
Yes. So I was only involved in looking at this in a long time ago, but I think we've seen the rise of oat milk, pea protein drinks. There's a lot of bases out there that are surprising, actually. I mean, the pea protein thing is relatively new and challenging, oat drinks, but I think plant-based options have a long way to go. I think that, again, they play into health and well-being. More natural, the more organic, the better they are for the environment. If they're a more sustainable crop, for example, then yes. And this is the sort of the blue sky side of innovation. So yes, I do think many more bases will come out, and if they've got those sustainability credentials or other health credentials, they'll do really well.
Excellent. Okay, and then just one last final question. Would you consider hard seltzers a big movement within no and low space? Obviously, it's getting a huge amount of coverage and a huge amount of growth in the US, and beginning to pick up a real pace in the UK as well. Do you think that that will get as popular in Europe?
Well, it's really interesting. What is a hard seltzer without the alcohol in it? It's just a seltzer, right? Which is a soft drink. So the answer is I don't know. I'm really not over the hard seltzer territory. I know it's a huge growth segment for very good reasons. Some of the attributes they have around low calorie certainly can transfer. The cleanliness of that taste. My concern would be when the rest of low and no seems to be going to real adult 100% taste satisfaction, and then you have a slightly watered down version of that taste. They could go into territories which are much more about quenching my thirst or ice cold refreshment, those sort of things. So I think there is a role for them, and I think the packaging graphics are ripe for those sort of territories, because lots of silvers, lots of blues, lots of really ice cold semiotics and things like that. So yeah, absolutely, I would expect that there would be something there, but I wonder what the proposition is beyond being light.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for your questions. There's some really great questions on there, and I think that pretty much closes us out this morning. It's been a really interesting discussion, and thank you everybody who turned up and for giving your time this morning. I genuinely hope that you found it really interesting and got some value out of it. Of course, a massive big thank you to you, Brendan. Some really brilliant and interesting thoughts and points that you've raised there, and certainly very kind of insightful and useful.
Thanks for having me, Jody.
Oh, that's an absolute pleasure. So obviously, for those of you who are still on the webinar, we hope you enjoyed it. It goes without saying, we'd love to help you either from Brendan on a strategic perspective or Quantum on a creative perspective to help with any of your plans. But we also really want to ensure that these sessions are useful. So please do send any other sort of suggestions of other topics that you might like us to cover on some of these webinars, and anything that you have a challenge with, or anything that you're trying to sort of wrap your head around. Ultimately, we're all here to support and help you guys after all. So again, thank you ever so much for your attendance. Hope you enjoyed it, and hope to see you at the next one. Thanks very much.